family disowned her at dinner. The mafia boss announced, "She's my family now. Get out." The invitation had felt like a trap, but it was a trap Sienna Morales had walked into with her eyes wide open. Hope, she mused, was a desperate and ugly thing. It was the only reason she stood shivering in the November cold outside L'Alter, smoothing the front of a second-hand burgundy dress she had spent her last $40 on. The fabric was decent silk, but it was thin, offering no protection against the wind whipping off the river. She'd been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight, one at the diner, pulling espressos until her wrists ached, and one bartending at a dive bar where the tips barely covered her bus pass. She was 25 years old, and she was perpetually exhausted. L'Alter was not a place for the exhausted. It was a place for the anointed, the untouchable, the wealthy. Golden light spilled from the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating patrons in tailored suits and jewelry that glittered like captured stars. This was her family's world, a world that had once, briefly, been hers. The invitation, embossed on heavy cream cardstock, had arrived at her tiny apartment a week ago. "You are requested to attend a private dinner in celebration of Ricardo Morales' 60th birthday." Requested, not invited. It was a summons. For 3 years, there had been nothing. 3 years of silence. 3 years of slammed doors and disconnected numbers. 3 years since she had been excised from the Morales family legacy like a cancerous growth. And now, this. Sienna took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. She had allowed herself to hope this dinner meant reconciliation, that her father, on the milestone of his 60th birthday, had softened, that her mother missed her, that her brother, Lucas, had grown a spine. She pushed through the heavy, revolving brass door, the sudden warmth and the scent of truffle oil and old money enveloping her. A host, painfully thin and dressed in black, looked up. His eyes scanned her dress, her worn coat, and the scuff on the heel of her shoe. A flicker of disdain, so fast she might have missed it if she had not once been trained to see it. "Good evening," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am here for the Morales party." The man's expression did not change. "Of course. This way. Miss Morales." He led her past the main dining room, where conversations hummed at a polite, restrained volume, and toward a private, glass-walled alcove overlooking the city skyline. They were all there, seated around a long mahogany table, her father, Ricardo, at the head, looking imperious, her mother, Isabella, draped in diamonds that matched the ice in her eyes, and her brother, Lucas, who nervously adjusted his cuffs and refused to meet her gaze. As Sienna approached, the polite hum of their conversation died. It did not just quiet, it was extinguished. "Sienna?" her father said. His voice was flat, acknowledging her presence as one might acknowledge a crack in the plaster. "Father, happy birthday." She placed a small, neatly wrapped gift on the table. It was a first-edition copy of The Old Man and the Sea. Found after a month of searching second-hand bookstores, it had cost her 2 weeks' worth of groceries. Her mother, Isabella, glanced at the small gift and then at Sienna's dress. A tiny, cruel smile touched her lips. "Burgundy, how bold of you, dear. I see you are still attempting to be noticed." "Hello, Mother." Lucas. Lucas mumbled a greeting, sinking lower in his chair. "Sit, Sienna," her father commanded, gesturing to the single empty chair at the far end of the table, as far from him as possible. She sat. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. A waiter appeared, pouring her water. Sienna stared at the heavy silver cutlery, the multiple forks, the crystal glass. She remembered which bread plate was hers, which fork was for the salad. These rules, at least, had stayed with her. She had been disowned for breaking the only rule that mattered. It had happened 3 years ago, not in a grand dining room, but in her father's suffocatingly quiet study. He had presented her with a man, Julian Vance, the heir to a shipping conglomerate. Julian was handsome, 30 pounds overweight, and possessed eyes that were utterly vacant. He had looked at Sienna not as a person, but as a potential acquisition. He is a suitable match, Ricardo Morales had declared, not asked. The Vances are an old family. This alliance will be very beneficial for Morales Imports. Sienna, then 22 and full of a fire she had not yet had beaten out of her, had refused. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had simply said, "No." The word had echoed in the study. Her father had looked at her as if she had spoken in a dead language. "It is not a request," he had said, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I will not marry a man I do not know, let alone a man I do not love. I will not be a bargaining chip for your company." Her mother had been there, twisting a ring on her finger. "Do not be so dramatic. Sienna, love is for the poor. We are talking about your future, your security." "My security is not worth my life," Sienna had replied, and in that moment she had sealed her fate. Her father stood, and he was not a tall man, but he filled the room with a cold, compressed anger. "If you walk out that door, you are no longer a Morales. You will have nothing. You will be nothing. You are choosing poverty and disgrace over your family. Do you understand me?" She had looked at her mother, who was examining her manicure. She had looked at her father, whose face was a mask of iron. "I understand," she had whispered, and she had walked out. The locks on her apartment, paid for by the family, were changed by noon the next day. Her bank account, tied to the family trust, was emptied. Her phone was disconnected. She had stood on a New York sidewalk with one suitcase and the clothes on her back. She had learned, very quickly, what it meant to be poor. Now, sitting at the table, she realized the last 3 years had been a test. This dinner was not a reconciliation. It was a final judgment. "We were just discussing Lucas's engagement to Cynthia Van Doren," Isabella said, smiling brightly at her son. "A wonderful girl, from a wonderful family. They are honeymooning in the Maldives." "That's lovely," Sienna said, her throat tight. "Yes," Ricardo said, finally looking at her. His eyes were dissecting her, the cheap dress, the hairline shadows of exhaustion under her eyes. "Lucas understands loyalty. He understands duty." The first course arrived, a scallop bisque. Sienna picked up the correct spoon, her hand steady, but she could not eat. "Tell me, Sienna," her mother said, leaning forward, "what exactly is it you do now? I heard you were serving people. Coffee?" She said the word coffee as if it were a contagion. "I work at a diner, mother, and I bartend." "My goodness!" Isabella placed a hand on her chest, her diamond bracelet flashing. "Ricardo, can you imagine? A Morales serving coffee. It's a humiliation." "She chose it," Ricardo said, cutting into his bread. "She chose to be an embarrassment." "It's honest work," Sienna said, the words barely audible. "Honest?" Lucas sneered, finally finding his courage now that she was the target. "Is that what you call it? Living in that hovel in Queens, looking like that? You're a disgrace to the name." Sienna looked down at her plate. The blood was roaring in her ears. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. "I was invited here. Father, if you only asked me here to insult me." "I asked you here," Ricardo said, his voice rising, drawing the attention of the nearby tables, "to show you precisely what you threw away. You had everything, a name, a future, and you threw it all away for pride, for some childish notion of romance." He stood up, tapping his glass for a toast. The entire alcove went silent. "To my birthday," he said, "and to family, the one that matters." He raised his glass to Lucas and Isabella. He did not look at Sienna. It was the final cut, the public execution of her hope. Sienna pushed back her chair. The legs scraped loudly on the marble floor. "Thank you for the dinner," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "I see I made a mistake. I'll go." "Yes, you will," Isabella said, her voice dripping venom. "But you won't just walk out. You've caused enough of a scene. Security." She signaled the host, who immediately moved toward 2 broad-shouldered men in suits standing near the entrance. Sienna froze. They were going to have her thrown out, like a common vagrant. The humiliation burned, hot and acidic, in her throat. She could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. "Please," she whispered, looking at her father. "Don't." Ricardo turned his back to her. The security guards approached. "Miss, you need to come with us." Sienna's entire world narrowed to that single, horrifying moment. She had nothing. She had no one. And then a chair scraped across the floor in the main dining room. "That won't be necessary." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the restaurant like a shard of obsidian. It was deep, calm, and held an authority that was absolute. The security guards stopped. The host turned pale. A man emerged from a private, shadowed booth in the corner. Sienna had not noticed him before, but she realized, with a jolt, that he must have been watching the entire time. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed molded to him. His hair was dark. His face was a map of hard angles and striking. Severe beauty, but it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were dark, sharp, and utterly still. He moved with a predatory grace, not a single motion wasted. He stopped beside Sienna's chair, standing between her and her family. He did not look at her. He fixed his gaze on Ricardo Morales. Ricardo, for the first time in Sienna's life, looked uncertain. He did not recognize this man, but he recognized the power that radiated from him. "I beg your pardon," Ricardo said. "This is a private family matter." "It stopped being a family matter when you called security," the man said. His voice was smooth, with a faint, almost imperceptible accent that hinted at old-world roots. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" Lucas blustered, trying to sound brave. The man slowly turned his gaze to Lucas. Lucas visibly recoiled, his face losing its color. The man looked back at Ricardo. "My name is Vincent DeLuca." The name dropped into the silence like a stone. Sienna saw her father's blood drain from his face. Isabella's hand flew to her throat, her diamonds trembling. DeLuca, the DeLucas, the family that owned half the city's shipping and construction, and, according to rumor, 100% of its shadows. Vincent DeLuca's eyes hadn't left Sienna since she first walked into the restaurant. He had recognized her instantly. It had been years, but she had the same eyes as her brother. Mateo's eyes. Mateo, his best friend, the only man he had ever trusted. The man who had died taking a bullet meant for him. Vincent had watched Sienna Morales handle her family with a quiet, brittle strength that reminded him so much of his friend it made his chest ache. Now, he looked at Ricardo, his expression unreadable. "Sienna will not be leaving." "She is not welcome here," Ricardo managed, his voice strained. "I don't care." Vincent finally turned, his dark eyes meeting Sienna's. She was trembling, her face pale with shock and humiliation. He felt a cold, unfamiliar rage settle in his gut. "She is with me." "With you?" Isabella scoffed, though her voice wavered. "What are you talking about?" Vincent's gaze returned to Isabella. "I'm her fiancé." The silence that followed was absolute. Sienna's heart stopped. She stared at him. Fiancé? This was insane. This was a nightmare. This was a new, fresh hell. "That's impossible," Lucas stammered. "You heard me." Vincent's voice was soft, but it carried. He put a hand on the back of Sienna's chair. It wasn't a touch, just a presence, a shield. "She is my family now, and you." His eyes swept over Ricardo. "Isabella and Lucas will never speak to her like that again." He looked at Ricardo, whose face was a mask of confusion and terror. "This dinner is over. Get out." It was a complete reversal of power. The Morales family, in their own private room, were being dismissed. Ricardo looked like he wanted to argue, but he met Vincent's gaze and the words died in his throat. He knew that name. He knew what it meant. To defy Vincent DeLuca here, in public, was not an option. Wordlessly, Ricardo signaled to his wife and son. They gathered their things, Isabella fumbling with her clutch, Lucas nearly knocking over a glass. They walked out of the alcove, humiliated in their own turn, without a single backward glance at Sienna. The restaurant was deathly quiet. Sienna was still frozen, rooted to her chair. The security guards had melted back into the walls. Vincent DeLuca looked down at her. His expression had softened almost imperceptibly. "Sienna?" he said, his voice now gentle. "We're leaving." He offered his hand. She didn't take it. She couldn't move. He simply placed a light, warm hand on her lower back, a gesture of pure guidance. "It's all right. Walk with me." She rose on unsteady legs. She felt the eyes of every patron in the restaurant follow them as Vincent guided her through the dining room and out the heavy brass doors into the biting cold of the night. The moment the frigid air hit her, the spell broke. Adrenaline, sharp and painful, flooded her system. She ripped herself away from his grasp, stumbling back. "Oh, what was that?" she demanded, her voice raw. "What did you do? Fiancé? Are you insane? You just humiliated me even more." Vincent stood calmly, unfazed by her anger. He watched her, his head tilted slightly. A long, black sedan, impossibly clean, idled at the curb. "I was protecting you," he said. "Protecting me? By lying, by claiming me like I'm some property. I don't even know who you are." "You know my name." "I know a name," she shot back, wrapping her arms around herself. "A name your driver probably whispered to the maitre d'. You embarrassed my family." "They embarrassed themselves," Vincent replied, his voice flat. "They deserved it. I didn't like the way they spoke to you." "You don't get to decide that," she cried, tears of frustration and rage finally stinging her eyes. "You made it worse. You made me look like you're... I don't even know what..." He took a step closer, but stopped when she flinched. "I apologize for the shock. The fiancé. It was the only thing they would understand, the only claim they would respect." "A claim? I am not a claim." "No," he agreed softly. "You're not..." He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You saved my life once. Sienna, a long time ago. You just don't know it." Sienna stared at him, the anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by sheer confusion. "What are you talking about? I've never seen you before in my life." "You knew your brother, Matteo." Her breath hitched. The mention of her brother's name from this stranger's lips was a physical blow. Matteo, her older brother, the golden boy, the one who had died in a boating accident 4 years ago, the only one in the family who had ever truly loved her. "How did you know Matteo?" she whispered. Vincent's face hardened, a shadow passing over his features. "He was my friend, my closest friend." The sedan door opened. A driver stood waiting. "Get in the car, Sienna," Vincent said. It was not a request, but it was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." "You can't go back to your apartment when..." he said. "Your family is humiliated. Humiliated men are stupid. They are dangerous. And they are not the only people who are watching tonight. You're not safe." She looked down the dark street, then back at this impossible man. He knew Matteo. That one fact changed everything. "Where are we going?" "My home. You will be safe there. I give you my word." She hesitated, her mind racing. Go back to her cold, empty apartment, where she was a target? Or get in a car with a man who radiated danger but spoke of her dead brother? She chose the danger she didn't know. She walked to the car and got in, sliding to the farthest side of the plush leather seat. Vincent got in after her, and the car pulled silently into traffic. The drive was silent. Sienna huddled against the door, watching the city lights blur past. Vincent did not look at her. He stared out his own window, his profile rigid, lost in a thought she could not dare to guess. They arrived at a skyscraper in Tribeca. All black steel and glass, they went up a private elevator that opened directly into a penthouse. It was vast, sterile, and cold. The walls were glass, offering a view of the entire city glittering below. The furniture was minimalist, expensive, and unwelcoming. Sienna stood awkwardly in the entryway, her thin coat still on. She felt like a stray dog brought in from the rain. Vincent turned to her, his suit jacket still buttoned. He kept his distance. "The guest wing is this way. You will have your own space." He led her down a long, white hallway to a door. He opened it, revealing a bedroom larger than her entire apartment, with its own bathroom and a wall of windows. "The door's locked from the inside," he said, his voice neutral. "No one will bother you. There are clothes in the closet, they should fit. Food in the kitchen if you are hungry. Take whatever you need." She looked at him, searching his face for a hint of his intentions. There was nothing, just a deep, profound stillness. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice small. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. "Matteo spoke of you often. He loved you very much. He made me promise, if anything ever happened to him, that I would make sure you were safe." Sienna's knees felt weak. "He thought you were strong," Vincent continued, his voice softer now. "After watching you tonight, he was right. He did not touch her. He did not step closer. Sleep, Sienna, we can talk in the morning." He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the marble floor. She heard him go down the hall. Sienna locked the door. She stood in the center of the opulent room, her body trembling with delayed shock. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the silk comforter cool beneath her hands. The burgundy dress felt cheap and foreign. She went into the marble bathroom and turned on the shower, stepping under the scalding water. She scrubbed at her skin, trying to wash off the restaurant, the humiliation, the pity in the eyes of the other diners, the venom in her mother's voice. But she couldn't wash away the look in Vincent DeLuca's eyes. She finally turned the water off, wrapping herself in a thick, heavy towel. She found a plain t-shirt and cotton pants in the closet and put them on. She climbed into the enormous, empty bed and turned off the lights. In the darkness, the tears finally came. They were not the hot tears of anger she had felt outside. They were the cold, silent, racking sobs of a grief she had held back for 3 years. She cried for Matteo, the only person who had ever defended her. She cried for the family she had tried so desperately to win back, only to realize they were gone forever. And she cried because she had escaped one prison only to find herself in another, more beautiful, more dangerous cage, owned by a man who claimed her as his own. Down the hall, Vincent DeLuca stood in the shadows, leaning against the wall. He had not gone to his own room. He had heard the shower, and now he heard the silence that followed. He heard the muffled sound of her trying to cry without making noise. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was a man who dealt in violence, in numbers, in loyalty, and in death. He did not deal in this. He did not deal in broken things. He remembered Matteo's last words, gasping in an alleyway, blood on his lips. "Promise me, V, promise me you'll watch her. She's all alone." Vincent closed his eyes. His heart troubled. He had kept his promise. He had watched her. But now, for the first time, he had intervened, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning. He stayed there, a silent sentinel in the dark, until the sounds from her room finally quieted, and the city outside began to pale toward morning. Sienna woke to a profound, unsettling silence. For 3 years, her mornings had been a cacophony of sirens, the neighbor's television blaring through the thin wall, and the groan of the building's ancient pipes. Here, there was nothing. Just the soft, pearlescent gray of dawn filtering through windows that spanned an entire wall. She was in a bed larger than her last apartment's living room, buried in sheets so fine they felt like cool water against her skin. The events of the previous night rushed back in a wave of scorching humiliation. The dinner, her father's dismissal, the cold eyes of the security guards, and then him, Vincent DeLuca, fiancé. Shame was a physical weight, pressing her deep into the mattress. She had been rescued, but in the most debasing way possible, claimed in front of her family like a prize won at a carnival. She slid out of bed. The cotton t-shirt and pants she had found in the closet were soft, clearly expensive, and felt alien. Her own clothes, the second-hand burgundy dress and her worn coat were nowhere to be seen. A quick, panicked search of the closet revealed they had been replaced, hung neatly after being cleaned and pressed, her scuffed shoes polished to a shine she had not thought possible. It was an act of service that felt like a judgment. She dressed quickly, her hands fumbling. She had to leave. She could not stay here. A charity case for a man who knew her dead brother, a man who moved with the lethal quiet of a panther. She would find a back door, a service elevator. She would disappear back into the anonymity of the city and never, ever see any of them again. Her shoes made no sound on the thick-piled carpet as she crept down the white marble hallway. The penthouse was still, bathed in the gray morning light. She found the main living area, a vast expanse of glass and black leather, and saw him. Vincent DeLuca was already awake. He stood in front of the window, a wall of glass that overlooked the entire city, which was just beginning to stir miles below. He was dressed not in a suit, but in dark gray trousers and a simple black button-down shirt. The sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He held a small ceramic cup of coffee, and he was not looking at the view. He was watching the elevator doors, as if he had been waiting for her. He turned as she froze in the entryway. His face was calm, his dark eyes unreadable. "You're leaving," he stated. It was not a question. Sienna's throat closed. She nodded, clutching the strap of her purse. Thank you. For last night. For the room. But I have to go." "Go where?" His voice was quiet, but it filled the cavernous room. "To the apartment your family knows you live in, or to the diner where they know you work?" "That's not your concern." "It became my concern when I put my name on you in front of them," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. He set the cup down and moved toward her. Not threateningly, but with a deliberate, unhurried pace that made her want to bolt. He stopped a good 10 feet away. "You are not safe, Sienna. What I did last night, it was an insult to your father, a public one. He cannot touch me, so he will try to touch you, to prove I cannot hold what I claim." "I am not yours to claim," she retorted, her voice shaking. "I know that," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But they do not, and neither do my enemies. You walked out of that restaurant on my arm. In my world, that makes you mine until I say otherwise. Leaving now, like this, is like painting a target on your back." "So what am I?" she demanded, the shame turning to a bitter anger. "Your prisoner, a guest. What do you want from me, Mr. DeLuca?" "I want you to be safe," he said firmly. "I want you to eat, and I want you to listen. I made a promise to Mateo." The name, again. It was the only thing that kept her from running. "You keep saying that. You said he was your friend. Mateo. My brother. He wasn't like you. He was good. He worked in logistics for a shipping firm." A humorless, sad smile touched Vincent's lips. "He was good. You're right about that, but he did not work in logistics. Not really." He gestured to a sitting area. "Please, sit. Let me tell you what your brother actually did." Hesitantly, she sat on the edge of a black leather sofa. He sat in the armchair opposite, keeping his distance. "My family," Vincent began, leaning forward, his hands clasped, "has been in this city for a long time. We have built things, and we have managed things for decades. Much of that management was done in the shadows. My father ran it one way. When he died, I took over. I wanted to run it another." Sienna watched him, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. "I wanted to move us into the light," he said. "Take the businesses that were legitimate and expand them, cut loose the operations that were not. It was a slow, dangerous process. You cannot simply walk away from that life. People get hurt. My father's old guard. They saw it as weakness." "What does this have to do with Mateo?" "Mateo was my logistician, but he was not moving cargo. He was moving money. He was a genius with numbers, with systems. He was the one building the legitimate framework, hiding our assets from the old guard, cleaning everything piece by piece, so we could sever the ties without a war. He was the architect of my new foundation." Sienna's mind reeled. Mateo, her kind, bookish brother. had been laundering money for the DeLuca family. "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't." "He did," Vincent said, his voice gentle but absolute, "because he believed in it. He believed that we could build something that lasted, something that helped people instead of extorting them. He hated the violence. He was trying to end it." Vincent's eyes grew distant, lost in a memory that was clearly painful. 4 years ago, we had a meeting, a final one, with the old guard, led by a man named Anthony Moretti. Matteo had found a way to lock them out of the finances permanently. It was supposed to be a simple transfer of power, but Moretti found out what we were doing before we were ready. He paused, his jaw tightening. It was an ambush, in a garage downtown. They were waiting for me. Not for him. They never cared about the man behind the computer. Matteo? He shouldn't have even been there, but he was loyal. He showed up with me. Vincent looked directly at her, his eyes dark with a grief she recognized. They came for me. 2 men. Before I could even react, Matteo pushed me. He shoved me behind the car and took 2 bullets that were meant for my chest. He died on the pavement, in my arms. Sienna put a hand to her mouth, a silent sob catching in her throat. The boating accident, the closed casket, the quick, sterile funeral. It had all been a lie. "Your family buried him like a stranger," Vincent said, his voice thick with contempt. "They took the insurance payout and the condolence check my organization sent and never asked another question. They were relieved, I think, that the problem was gone." "I didn't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They told me he was on a company yacht, that there was a storm. He died protecting me. Sienna, his last words, were about you." Vincent stood and walked to a heavy desk in the corner. He opened a drawer and took out a small, velvet box. He brought it to her, placing it on the table between them. He did not open it. He let her. With trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, was a small silver locket. It was tarnished, dented, and familiar. She had given it to Matteo for his 18th birthday, with a tiny, ridiculous photo of the 2 of them inside. "He always wore it," Vincent said softly. "Under his shirt. I took it before they came. I kept it for you." She picked up the locket. It was still warm from his desk. Or perhaps it was just her skin. She fumbled with the clasp, and it sprang open. There they were, a 16-year-old Matteo, grinning and awkward in a rented tux, and a 12-year-old Sienna, all braces and frizzy hair. This was the proof. This was the truth. The brother she had adored had died a hero, but in a world she had never known existed. And this man, this dangerous, silent man, had been at the center of it all. The dam of her grief broke. She wept. Not the silent tears of the night before, but the gut-wrenching sobs of a 4-year-old wound ripped open. Vincent did not move. He did not touch her. He simply sat, a silent witness, giving her the respect of letting her mourn without interruption. When her sobs finally quieted, she wiped her face, clutching the locket in her fist. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, West," he said, "but you cannot leave. Not yet. This man, Moretti, he is still out there. Now that I have publicly claimed you, he sees you as a weakness, a lever to use against me. So I'm bait." "You are under my protection," he corrected her, his tone sharp. "I will not let what happened to Matteo happen to you. Stay, just for a few days, until I can make arrangements, until you are no longer visible." She looked at the locket, then at his face. He was not a savior. He was the reason her brother was dead. But he was also the only man who had honored her brother's memory, and he was the only man who had stood up to her family. She nodded, her voice raw. "A few days, that's all." The next week was a disorienting blur. Sienna lived in the guest wing, and Vincent in his... The penthouse was so large that they often went hours without seeing each other, but she always felt his presence. He had security bring her things from her apartment, and she was appalled when they arrived, 2 battered suitcases holding her entire life. He provided her with new clothes, simple, elegant things left on her bed, which she wore with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. She ate in the vast, sterile kitchen, food she had only ever served to others. She slept without the fear of her landlord pounding on the door for rent for the first time in 3 years. She was not cold, she was not hungry, and she was not afraid of the outside world. The safety was suffocating. She felt like a fraud, living in this glass tower, all paid for by the blood of her brother. She was enjoying a luxury that she had earned only by being a potential victim. One night, the guilt became too much. It was late, past 2 in the morning. She could not sleep. The silence of the penthouse seemed to amplify the screaming in her head. She went to the kitchen, seeking a glass of water, anything to ground her. She stood at the counter, staring at the dark, reflective surface, and saw the reflection of a ghost. She was pale, hollow-eyed, a parasite in a rich man's home. She had no job. She had no apartment. Her family had cast her out. Her only friend in the world, her brother, was dead. She had nothing. She was nothing. A small sound, a strangled sob, escaped her, then another. She slid down the side of the kitchen island, her back against the cold cabinet, and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She did not hear him approach. Sienna! She jumped, looking up. Vincent stood in the entryway, a dark silhouette against the moonlight streaming in from the living room. He was still in his suit, his tie loosened, his jacket off. He must have just gotten home. "I'm sorry," she choked out, trying to scramble to her feet. I didn't mean to wake you. I was just getting—" "You don't have to apologize," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. He walked over, not to her but to the coffee maker, and poured himself a glass of water. He drank it, his back to her. She tried to compose herself, wiping angrily at her tears. "It's just," she said, her voice breaking. "I have nothing. I have no one, my whole life. I have nothing to show for it. I am alone." The confession hung in the air, raw and pathetic. She waited for him to say something, to offer a platitude, to tell her to go to bed. Instead, he turned around. He looked at her, huddled on his kitchen floor like a piece of trash. He walked over to where he had draped his suit jacket over a chair. He picked it up. It was a heavy, dark wool. He came to her, and she flinched, expecting him to tell her to get up, but he didn't. He knelt, his knees cracking quietly in the silence, bringing him down to her level. He didn't speak. He just took the jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, and it smelled of him, a clean, sharp scent of sandalwood in the cold night air. It enveloped her in an impossible, confusing warmth. She stared at him. Her breath caught in her chest. He was so close. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes. His gaze was fixed on her, not with anger, but with an intensity that made her skin heat. "You're not alone," he whispered. The emotional tension in the room snapped taut, vibrating between them. He raised a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek. His touch was rough, calloused, but incredibly gentle. Her body swayed toward him, an involuntary magnetic pull. His eyes dropped to her mouth. She saw his throat move as he swallowed. She leaned in, her eyes fluttering closed, her lips parting. This was insane. This was wrong. But she was so tired of being alone. His lips were inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him. And then she pulled back, the jacket slipping from one shoulder. "No," she whispered, pushing against the floor. You don't have to do this." "Do what?" he asked, his voice low. "Pity me. I don't want your pity. I'm not a stray dog you have to take care of just because my brother—" He cut her off, his voice suddenly sharp. "I don't pity you." He stood up, pulling her to her feet with a firm grip on her arm. He did not let go. He looked down at her, his expression fierce. "Do not ever say that. I watched you in that restaurant. They tried to break you, and you stood. You were terrified, and you stood. I have seen armed men fold under less pressure. I don't pity you. Sienna, I admire you." She stared at him, speechless. No one had ever said those words to her. He finally let go of her arm. The moment was broken, but the air was still thick with what had almost happened. "There is an art fundraiser tomorrow night," he said, his voice all business again, as if the last 5 minutes had not happened. "It's for the city hospital, a very public event. You will come with me." "What? No, I can't. I don't belong at places like that." "You belong where I say you belong," he said, not unkindly. "People saw me claim you. Now they must see you on my arm. They must see that you are not my prisoner. You are with me. It is the only way to silence the whispers. It is the only way to make you safe. On my arm. No one will dare to touch you." The next evening, Sienna stared at her reflection. A dress had been delivered. It was hanging on her closet door when she woke. It was not black or gray or any of the muted colors that filled the penthouse. It was red, a deep, defiant blood-red silk that clung to her body as if it had been made for her. The neckline was modest, but the cut was all woman. It left her shoulders bare, and the fabric skimmed her hips before falling to the floor. She had put her hair up, her hands surprisingly steady. She wore no jewelry except for the small, silver locket tucked beneath the fabric, resting against her heart. When she walked out into the living room, Vincent was waiting by the elevator, fixing his cuffs. He wore a black tuxedo that made him look even taller, more imposing, more dangerous. He looked up, and he went utterly still. His eyes traveled from her face, down the line of her throat, over the red dress, and back up. He did not smile. He did not speak. His expression was one of profound, unguarded shock. It was as if he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. Not as Mateo's sister, not as a victim, but as a woman. The silence stretched, and Sienna felt a blush creep up her neck. His driver, a man named Sal, cleared his throat by the elevator. Vincent seemed to shake himself. He held out his arm, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sienna." She placed her hand on his forearm. His muscle was like steel beneath the fine wool. The fundraiser was a sea of black suits and glittering jewels. The ballroom was loud, bright, and suffocating. Sienna stayed close to Vincent's side, her hand locked on his arm. As he had predicted, their entrance stopped conversations. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, and she heard the whispers. That's her. The Morales girl, heard he ruined her family at L'Altar. She's lovely, but she looks terrified. DeLuca hasn't been seen with a woman in years." Vincent ignored them all, navigating the crowd with an easy, confident grace. He got her a glass of champagne, his body always angled slightly toward her, a physical shield. "They're all staring," she murmured, taking a sip. "Let them stare," he replied, his voice low and for her ears only. "They are irrelevant." A portly man in a tuxedo that was too tight approached them, his eyes slimy as he looked Sienna up and down. "Vince, good to see you. And this must be the new addition to the family." "Sienna, this is Albert Rossi," Vincent said, his voice flat. "Rossi, this is Sienna Morales." "A pleasure," Rossi said, taking her hand and holding it too long. His eyes lingered on the neckline of her dress. I see why you caused such a scene. My dear, a man might be willing to start a war for a view like that." Sienna tried to pull her hand back, her stomach turning. Vincent did not raise his voice. He did not move. He simply leaned in, his gaze fixed on Rossi, and his voice dropped to a lethal whisper that Sienna almost could not hear. "Al, if your eyes linger on her for one more second, I will personally ensure you never see anything again. And if you ever speak to her, or about her, like that again, you will not have a tongue left to do it with. Do you understand me?" The blood drained from Rossi's face. He looked like he had been struck. He dropped Sienna's hand as if it were on fire, sputtering. Just a joke, Vince. No harm meant, none at all. Go away, Vincent said. Rossi fled, melting into the crowd. Sienna was trembling. The casual, precise brutality of the threat terrified her. This was his world. This was the man who had promised her safety. Vincent turned to her, his face softening as he saw her expression. He will not bother you again. He guided her to a quieter corner, but the night was ruined. The tension from the kitchen, the near kiss, and now this raw display of his power, had her nerves shredded. They left early. The ride home in the back of the sedan was thick with a new, heavy silence. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows. Sienna stared out, her reflection pale against the glass. She could feel his eyes on her. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him, "for what you said to that man. He was disrespectful. You scared him to death. That was the intention." She finally turned to look at him. He was so close in the small, dark space. "Is that how you solve everything, with threats?" "Only the things that matter," he said. His hand was resting on the leather seat between them. She watched as he slowly, deliberately, turned it palm up. It was an invitation. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of Matteo. She thought of her family. She thought of the red dress and the look in his eyes. Slowly, she unlinked her own hands and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, his grip warm and strong. He did not pull her closer. He just held her hand, but it was everything. He lifted her hand, his eyes locked on hers, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. He did not release her hand. He kept it, his thumb stroking the back of her palm. He leaned in, and this time, she did not pull away. His other hand came up, cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. "Sienna," he whispered, and it sounded like a prayer. And then he kissed her. It was not the frantic, desperate kiss she had imagined. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was full of a tension that had been building for days. His lips were firm and warm and impossibly soft. It was a kiss of questions, of discovery. He tasted of the champagne he had barely touched, and something else, something dark and complex, something that was purely him. She let out a small sound, her hand coming up to rest on his tuxedo jacket. The kiss deepened, and she opened her mouth to him, a silent, sudden surrender. It was not pity. This was not admiration. This was something else entirely. This was hunger. This was a long overdue collision. He pulled back, just slightly, his forehead resting against hers. They were both breathing hard. His eyes were black in the darkness, and he was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world. She was breathless, dazed. The reality of what she had just done, who she had just kissed, came crashing in. She pulled back, her hand slipping from his. "I'm not yours," she whispered, the words a last, desperate defense of the self she was losing. Vincent watched her, his expression unreadable, but a small, slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Not yet," he replied. The kiss in the limousine had changed the air between them. It was no longer the still, sterile atmosphere of a protector in his charge. It was charged, volatile, and thick with unspoken questions. When they had returned to the penthouse, Vincent had walked her to her door, his hand warm on her lower back. He had looked at her for a long, heavy moment, his eyes searching her face, but he had only said, "Good night, Sienna," and retreated to his own side of the vast apartment. Sienna had slept, but it was a restless, fitful sleep. Her dreams filled with the scent of sandalwood and the phantom touch of his lips. She woke with a new, sharp resolve. She was not a prisoner. She was not a pet, and she would not be a kept woman. Living in a glass tower, waiting for a man to kiss her again. The safety he offered was a narcotic, and she was terrified of the addiction. She needed to reclaim her life, the one she had built, however meager. 2 days later, she found a job. It was at a small, independent bookstore in the village, a place called The Last Page. It smelled of aging paper, dust motes, and brewing tea. The owner, a kind, elderly woman named Alara, had hired her on the spot after Sienna had flawlessly alphabetized a fallen stack of novels in under 2 minutes. That evening, she found Vincent in his study, a room she had never entered. It was walled in dark wood and books, a stark contrast to the sterile white of the rest of the penthouse. He was on the phone, his back to her, his voice a low, authoritative murmur. "No, I want the shipments rerouted through the new holding. Moretti doesn't touch that pier. Understood." He hung up and turned, his eyes landing on her. He did not seem surprised to see her. Sienna. "I got a job," she said, her hands clasped in front of her, her voice more defiant than she intended. His expression did not change. "Where?" "A bookstore in the village, The Last Page." "I know it." He turned to look out the window. "That is not necessary. You are taken care of here." "That is the problem," she said, stepping further into the room. I can't just be taken care of. I have to work. I have to stand on my own. I want to pay you for my stay, for the clothes." A flicker of something, amusement or perhaps surprise, crossed his features. He turned back to her. "You want to pay me?" "Yes." She lifted her chin. "I can't pay for this. Not really. But I can contribute. I won't be a charity case. Vincent." He studied her, a long, silent appraisal. She felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, but she refused to look away. "Very well," he said finally. "I will accept $100 a week." She bristled. It was a token. It was an insult. "That's not—" "That is what I will accept," he said, his voice firm, cutting off her argument. "You wish to pay. You will pay what I ask. You start tomorrow?" "Yes." "Sal will drive you." "No," she countered immediately. "I'm taking the bus. I need it to be normal." He looked like he was about to argue. His jaw tightened, and a muscle ticked. She could see the battle behind his eyes, the protector warring with the man who was, perhaps, beginning to respect her. "The bus," he said, as if testing the word. He nodded once. "Fine, but you will take a car home. Sal will pick you up at 6. That is not negotiable. Sienna, the streets are not safe for you after dark." It was a compromise, but it felt like a victory. The next few weeks settled into a strange, new routine. Sienna would wake in the pre-dawn light, dress in the simple, elegant clothes he had provided, and take the bus downtown. The hours at the bookstore were a balm, the simple, tactile work of shelving books, of helping customers, of smelling the ink and paper, grounded her. It was the first time in 3 years she had felt not just safe, but competent. But the protection was always there. She would see it in the reflection of the shop window, a dark gray sedan parked across the street, a man inside reading a newspaper that never seemed to change. When she walked to the bus stop, a man in a jogging suit would pass her, then stop at the corner, stretching for an impossibly long time. Vincent was giving her space, but it was a carefully curated illusion of freedom. He was a spider, and she was in his web. The realization was both comforting and chilling. At night, she would return to the penthouse. Sal would be waiting at the curb at 6 o'clock precisely. She and Vincent would eat dinner together, often in silence. But it was no longer an awkward silence. It was a shared space. They would talk about her day at the store, or a political headline. He never, ever spoke of his work, but she could see it in the exhaustion he carried, the way he would rub the bridge of his nose when he thought she was not looking. The tension that had culminated in the limousine kiss was still there, simmering beneath every polite request to pass the salt. But neither of them moved to acknowledge it. It was a door left ajar, which both were afraid to push open or slam shut. The first crack in their fragile peace came not from within, but from her past. She was shelving a new shipment of biographies when the bell above the bookstore door chimed. "Be right with you," she called out, balancing 3 heavy books on her arm. "There's no rush. Sienna, you always were the diligent one." Her blood ran cold. She froze, her back to the door. That voice, soft, privileged, and laced with a confidence she had once mistaken for charm. She turned slowly. Julian Vance stood by the door, rainwater dripping from his expensive trench coat. He was exactly as she remembered. Blonde, blue-eyed, and handsome in the way of a man who had never worked a day in his life. He was the man her father had chosen for her, the man whose rejection had cost her everything. "Julian," she said, her voice flat. The books in her arms suddenly felt like lead. "I've been looking for you," he said, his smile full of practiced remorse. He took a step closer, his eyes scanning her simple clothes, the apron tied around her waist. "When I heard what your father did at that dinner, it was monstrous. I told him so." Sienna's mind flashed to Vincent. "I will not let them touch you." "What are you doing here, Julian?" "I came to apologize," he said, spreading his hands. "Sienna, I was an idiot, a coward. I should have stood up to your father. I should have told him that I didn't care about the merger, that I cared about you. I let him railroad me, and I let him disown you. I have regretted it every day for 3 years." It was the speech she had dreamed of hearing when she was 22 and alone. Now, it just sounded hollow. "It's a little late for that," she said, placing the books on a cart. "Is it?" he pressed, moving closer. "I heard you were staying with someone. This DeLuca, Sienna, these are not good people. This is a dangerous world. You don't belong in it." "And I suppose I belong with you?" "You belong with someone who can give you the life you deserve, the life your father stole from you." He reached out, touching her arm. "Please, just have coffee with me. Let me explain. Let me prove I've changed." She looked at his hand on her arm, then back at his earnest, pleading face. A part of her, the part that was so very tired, was tempted. He was normal. He was the life she was supposed to have, a life without bodyguards, without whispers of men named Moretti. "Coffee," she said, pulling her arm away. "Tomorrow, at the cafe on the corner. 10 minutes. That's all I can give you." "Thank you, Sienna," he said, his smile triumphant. "You won't regret this." He left the store, and Sienna leaned against the bookshelf, her heart pounding. She did not see him climb into the back of a black Mercedes parked down the street. "She's hooked," Julian said, wiping the smile from his face. "She'll meet me tomorrow." The man in the shadows of the car, Anthony Moretti, lit a thin cigar. Good boy. Keep her talking. Find out what DeLuca values. Find out where his home really is. We already know about the penthouse. I want to know where he lives." Sienna said nothing to Vincent that night. A small, unfamiliar seed of guilt had planted itself in her chest. She was meeting her ex-fiancé, the man who represented everything Vincent had saved her from. But when she walked into the penthouse, Vincent was standing by the windows, not in his usual suit, but in trousers and a dark shirt. He was watching the city, but he turned as she entered, and she knew, instantly, that he knew. "Sal followed me today," she stated, her defenses rising. "I had you protected," Vincent corrected, his voice a low growl. "There is a difference. Who was he, Sienna?" "You know who he was, Julian Vance." Vincent's entire body went rigid. It was not a visible movement, just a sudden, dangerous compression of energy. He looked as if he had been carved from stone. "Stay away from him." The command, so flat and absolute, ignited her temper. It was her father's voice. It was Ricardo Morales giving an order. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, walking toward her. "He is a ghost. He's a part of the life that tried to suffocate you. He is weak, and he is poisonous. Not everyone from your past deserves a second chance." "You don't know him." "I know of him," Vincent snapped, his voice sharp for the first time. "I know of the Vances. They are parasites, living off a name they ruined generations ago. He's not worth your time." "And who is worth my time?" she shot back, throwing her bag onto a chair. "You? The men who follow me? The men you threaten at parties? You don't get to decide who I talk to. Vincent, you are not my father. You are not my anything." "I am the man keeping you alive," he thundered, his controlled facade finally cracking. The sheer force of his voice made her flinch. "Whoop, by controlling me," she cried, tears of rage and frustration welling. "That's all this is, isn't it? You claimed me at that dinner to show your power. You put me in this glass cage to show you have me followed. You tell me who I can and cannot see. You are just like him." "Do not," he whispered, his voice dropping to a lethal, trembling intensity, "ever compare me to him." "Why? Because you use violence instead of just words. Because you're better at it. I had a life before you. Vincent, it was hard, and it was poor. But it was mine. At least I was free." "Were you?" he said, his face etched with a frustration so deep it looked like pain. "Were you free when you were starving? Were you free when your family was trying to sell you? I am not doing this to control you. Sienna, I am doing this because I care too much to be indifferent." His words struck her, but she was too angry to let them land. "I don't care," she lied, her voice shaking. "I am going out. I am going for a walk, and you will not have your men follow me." "Sienna, don't. It's not safe." "I don't care." She grabbed her coat and stormed out, jabbing the button for the elevator. She heard him call her name, a raw, desperate sound, but she ignored it. The doors slid shut, sealing him in his tower. In the penthouse, Vincent slammed his fist onto the marble-topped console table. The sound cracked through the room. A small vase rattled. He had lost control. He had let her walk out. He had seen the look on her face, the look that said he was the same as her father, and it had gutted him. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hand shaking with rage. "She's on the move. She's angry. Do not let her out of your sight. Full team, now. And get me everything on Julian Vance. I want to know what he ate for breakfast." Sienna hit the street, tears blurring the city lights. She walked, fast, not caring where she was going. She just needed air. She needed to escape the penthouse, escape him. "I care too much to be indifferent." His words echoed in her head. She hated him for it. Hated him for making her feel, for making her weak, for being right. She was furious and confused, and she was crying on a public street like a child. She turned a corner onto a quieter, tree-lined street. Scrubbing at her face, it was getting dark. The air was cold. She pulled her coat tighter, her anger beginning to fade, replaced by a cold, familiar loneliness. She heard the footsteps behind her. Her entire body tensed. It was a skill she had learned in her 3 years alone. You always listened. The footsteps were heavy. 2 sets. They didn't speed up when she did, but they kept pace. They were professionals. This was not Vincent's men. Their presence was subtle, like a shadow. This was loud. This was an active hunt. She crossed the street, her heart hammering against her ribs. They crossed, too, angling to cut her off. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She fumbled for her phone, but her hands were trembling. "Miss Morales?" a man's voice called out. It was rough, unpleasant. She started to run. "We wouldn't do that," the second man said. He was suddenly in front of her, stepping out from the shadow of a parked van. The other man was behind her. They were flanking her. "Please," she stammered. "I don't have any money." "We don't want your money," the first man said, smiling. It was a terrible smile. He was close now. She could smell the stale cigarettes on him. "Mr. Moretti just wants to talk. He's very interested in Mr. DeLuca's new hobby." Moretti, the name Vincent had spoken, the man who had killed Matteo. The man grabbed her arm. His grip was like a steel trap. She opened her mouth to scream, but before any sound could escape, a black sedan with tinted windows mounted the curb, its tires squealing on the pavement, its headlights pinning them in a blinding white light. The doors flew open. Sal, Vincent's driver, and another man, one she recognized from the jogging suit, were out of the car. It was not a fight. It was a disassembly. It was fast, brutal, and horrifyingly silent. The man holding her arm grunted as the jogging suit man struck him, a hard, precise blow to the throat. He released her, gasping. Sal moved past her, engaging the second man, who had pulled a knife. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the knife clattered to the sidewalk. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The two men were on the ground, groaning, one clutching his throat, the other his shattered wrist. Sienna was frozen, hyperventilating, pressed against the cold brick of a building. "Get in the car, miss," Sal commanded, his voice urgent, his face grim. He grabbed her arm, not painfully, but with an authority that was absolute, and bundled her into the back seat. The other bodyguard got in the front. Sal took the wheel, and the car peeled away from the curb, leaving the two men writhing on the sidewalk. The ride back was silent, broken only by the sound of Sienna's ragged, shuddering breaths. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. They had known her name. They had said Moretti. Vincent hadn't been controlling her. He had been trying to save her. And she, in her stupid, childish pride, had walked right into their trap. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse. Vincent was standing right there, where she had left him. He was not by the window. He was in the center of the room, as if he had been pacing. He was pale, his shirt untucked, his hair a mess. He looked undone. His eyes landed on her, taking in her terrified, tear-streaked face, her trembling body. She flinched, bracing for the explosion, for the "I told you so," for the rage. He took one look at her, and the fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a profound, aching relief that was so raw it staggered her. He did not shout. He did not scold. He simply walked to the sofa, grabbed a heavy cashmere blanket, and came to her. He wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, his hands firm, and then he just pulled her in. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against his chest, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head, pressing her face into his shirt. He was solid and warm, and he smelled like safety. "You're shaking," he whispered, his voice rough. They knew my name," she stammered into his chest. They said Moretti." "I know," he said, his voice rumbling against her ear. "I know. Sal called. It's handled. They won't get near you again." He held her for a long time, just letting her tremble, his hand stroking her hair. Finally. He loosened his grip, just enough to tilt her chin up with his fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. His eyes were black, intense, and filled with a desperate sincerity. "You are not alone anymore, Sienna," he said, his voice thick. "I will not let them touch you, ever. Do you understand me?" The gentleness, where she had expected rage, was her undoing. This man, who had every right to be furious with her, was only concerned. This man, who she had accused of being a tyrant, had just saved her life. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. "I was so stupid. I thought you were just trying to control me, like my father." "I was protecting you," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "Poorly. It seems I should have told you. I should have explained." "No," she said, pulling back just enough to see him. I wouldn't have listened. I'm sorry, Vincent." She looked up at him, at his tired, worried face, at the man who had kept his promise to her dead brother, the man who had kissed her in the dark. The wall she had kept around her heart, the last defense, simply crumbled. "Please," she whispered, her hands clutching the front of his shirt. Don't leave me alone tonight." His gaze dropped to her lips. The air in the foyer crackled. The last of her fear burned away by a sudden, sharp spike of desire. This was it. This was the surrender. "Sienna," he breathed, and it was both a question and a plea. She gave him his answer. She rose on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. The kiss was not like the one in the car. That had been discovery. This was a desperate, primal collision. It was relief. and fear, and a dark, pent-up passion that exploded between them. His hands, which had been gentle, were suddenly fierce. They slid from her shoulders, one clamping around her waist, pulling her flush against him, the other burying itself in her hair, tilting her head. She moaned into his mouth, her hands moving from his chest to his shoulders, clinging to him. He kissed her as if he was starving, as if he was trying to pour all of his fear, all of his relief, all of his closely guarded devotion directly into her. It was deep and searching, and it left her breathless. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers, both of them panting. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice ragged. "Yes," she breathed, and kissed him again, a soft, sealing kiss. His control snapped. With a low groan, he slid one arm under her legs and the other around her back, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. Her legs wrapped around his waist, the blanket pooling at her feet. She didn't care. He carried her from the foyer, through the moonlit living room, past her own guest room, and into the dark, imposing sanctuary of his. He did not turn on the lights. The city skyline, glittering like a fallen constellation, was all the light they needed. He laid her gently on the massive bed, the covers cool against her back. He followed her down, his body half covering hers, bracing himself on his elbows. He never broke eye contact. He looked at her, his eyes tracing every feature of her face as if he was memorizing her. "You are beautiful," he whispered, his thumb tracing her jawline. "And you are so strong." He kissed her again, slowly this time, with a tenderness that made her heart ache. His hand moved from her jaw, down her neck, to the collar of her coat, slowly, reverently. He slipped it from her shoulders. He did the same with her sweater, his hands warm on her skin. She fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, her fingers clumsy. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that lit his eyes and covered her hands with his. "I'm here," he whispered. "We have time." He undressed her slowly, his gaze a physical touch that set her skin on fire. And she, in turn, pulled his shirt open, sliding her hands over the hard, warm planes of his chest, feeling the heavy, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. There was no pity in his touch. There was no control. There was only a raw, desperate need, tempered by a tenderness she had never known. He kissed her eyelids, her temples, the hollow of her throat. His hands traced the curve of her hip. His lips followed. He whispered promises against her skin, not of forever, not of love, but of this, of now. "You're safe. I have you. Just let go." And she did. She let go of the past, of her family, of the fear and the loneliness. She arched into his touch, her eyes locked on his in the darkness, and for the first time in her entire life, Sienna Morales was not alone. She woke to the sound of sizzling and the smell of coffee. Sunlight was streaming into the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. She was in Vincent's bed. She was alone. She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest. She was wearing one of his black button-down shirts. It was huge on her, the cuffs falling past her hands, and it smelled of him. She felt different, not ashamed, not regretful. She felt a strange, quiet calm. The fear of the previous night was a distant echo, muffled by the memory of his touch, of his gentleness. Sienna padded out of the bedroom, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. She followed the sounds to the kitchen. Vincent was standing at the stove, his back to her. He was not in a suit. He was wearing a pair of gray sweatpants that hung low on his hips, and a simple black t-shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. His hair was damp, clearly from a shower, and he was cooking. He was scrambling eggs in a pan. He heard her and turned. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of his mouth. It transformed his severe, handsome face, making him look younger, more approachable. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and warm. Sienna felt a blush creep up her neck. She pulled the cuffs of the shirt over her hands, suddenly shy. "Hi." "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing with the spatula. "Please." He turned back to the stove, expertly slid the eggs onto 2 plates, and then poured her a cup of coffee, black, just how he drank it. He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers. The simple touch sent a jolt through her. The frantic, desperate passion of the night had settled into this. An easy, quiet domesticity. The war was outside, but in here, he was just a man making breakfast. "How do you feel?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. Sienna felt the weight of his gaze, but it was no longer an assessment. It was just concern. "I feel," she said, taking a sip of the hot coffee, "safe." He nodded, and for the first time, she thought she saw the weight of the world lift, just slightly, from his shoulders. He turned back to the plates, and she stood in his kitchen, wearing his shirt, and watched him. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that was dangerously close to domestic. The searing passion of that night had forged a new, unspoken bond between them. The penthouse, once a sterile glass box, began to feel like a sanctuary. Sienna went to her job at the bookstore, reveling in the simple, tactile normalcy of it. She insisted on paying her token $100 in rent, a ritual Vincent accepted with a small, private smile that always made her heart skip. She no longer fought him on the protection. Sal's presence in the dark sedan became a quiet comfort, a sign that she was no longer alone in the world. She would come home, and Vincent would be there, not always in person, but in presence. Sometimes he would be in his study, the door closed, his voice a low, indecipherable rumble as he spoke on the phone. On other nights, he would be in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, a bottle of wine open, and they would cook together in a comfortable, easy silence. They slept in his bed every night. This new intimacy was a revelation to her. It was not always the desperate, passionate collision of their first night. More often, it was a quiet tenderness that stunned her. It was him reading a financial report in bed, one hand idly stroking her hair as she read a novel beside him. It was her waking in the middle of the night from a dream of her family, and his arms tightening around her, pulling her back against his solid, warm chest, his breath stirring her hair. But beneath the calm, Sienna felt a shift. Vincent grew more distant, not from her, but from the moment. His gaze would drift to the city skyline, his jaw set, his thoughts 1,000 miles away. He was quieter, his rare smiles tinged with a preoccupying tension. He spent more hours in his study. The door, once left ajar, was now firmly closed. When he thought she was asleep, he would get up, his powerful body moving silently in the dark, and stand by the window, a dark silhouette against the city lights, a general surveying his battlefield. A war was brewing. She knew it, the attack on her, and Julian Vance's suspicious, perfectly timed reappearance had been the opening shots. Vincent was preparing his countermove against Moretti, and the weight of it was a tangible thing, a third presence in their home. One rainy Tuesday, Sienna's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered it in the bookstore's back room. "Is this Sienna Morales?" The voice was a reedy, nervous woman's. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Nurse Patel. I'm at the Queensboro Public Clinic. It's about an Elena Morales, your grandmother." Sienna's heart stopped. Abuela, her grandmother. Elena was the only member of the Morales family who had ever shown her kindness. A warm, strong woman who smelled of cinnamon and soap. After Mateo's death and Sienna's subsequent disownment, her parents had forbidden Elena from contacting her, moving her from her comfortable apartment into a state-run facility, a punishment for her loyalty. "Is she all right?" Sienna asked, her voice trembling. "She's fading, dear. Pneumonia? She's been asking for you, for days. She keeps asking for Mija Sienna." The nurse paused, and her voice dropped. "Look, you're..." Your parents left explicit instructions. You are not on the approved visitor list, but she's running out of time. I thought you should know." "I'm coming," Sienna said, hanging up. "Alara, I have to go. It's a family emergency." She ran out into the rain. Sal, startled, got out of the car as she ran toward it, her face pale. "Miss Morales, what is it?" "Take me to Queensboro Clinic. Now, Sal, please. It's my grandmother." Sal's face was grim. He knew his orders. She was not to leave her approved route, but he also saw the raw panic in her eyes. He made a decision. He opened the back door. "Get in, I'll clear it." The clinic was a place of beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the antiseptic smell of despair. It was everything the penthouse was not. Hopeless, cold, and public. It was where people with no options and no money came to die. The fact that her wealthy, powerful family had left her abuela here was a cruelty that stole Sienna's breath. Nurse Patel met them, her face kind. "She's in room 204. I'll keep an eye out for your parents." Sienna walked into the room. Elena Morales was a tiny, frail bird lost in a sea of thin, white hospital sheets. Her breathing was a shallow, wet rattle, but her eyes, dark and sharp, fluttered open. "Mia," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "I'm here. Abuela," Sienna choked out, rushing to the bed, taking the frail, papery hand. "I'm here." "Ah, Sienna," a faint smile touched her lips. "You came. They said you would not." "They couldn't keep me away," Sienna said, tears streaming down her face. "Good." Elena squeezed her hand, a flicker of her old strength. "You were always the strong one, like Mateo. He was so proud of you. I am so proud." "I love you, Abuela." "I know, mija. Be happy. Do not let them break you." Her eyes drifted closed, her hand going slack. Sienna stayed for an hour, holding the old woman's hand, whispering stories about the bookstore, until her grandmother's breathing evened out into a sedated sleep. She finally stumbled out, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. As she passed the nurse's station, she overheard Nurse Patel speaking to another orderly. "It's just awful," the nurse was saying. "That poor old woman, her son, Ricardo. He pays the bare minimum, just enough to keep her here and not at his home. He hasn't visited in 6 months. Left a note that if his disgraced daughter showed up, security was to be called." Sienna froze. Security was to be called. It was the restaurant all over again. The final, posthumous act of humiliation. They hadn't just disowned her, they were actively trying to erase her, even from the memory of a dying woman. She walked out of the clinic in a daze. Sal held the car door open, his face a mask of professional concern. The drive back to Manhattan was silent. Sienna stared, unseeing, at the rain-lashed windows. She held the grief and the rage in a tight, brittle ball inside her chest. When the car pulled into the private drive of the penthouse, she got out, but she did not go inside. She just stood in the cold, driving rain. Her thin jacket soaked through in seconds. Then her legs gave out. She sank onto the bottom step of the granite entryway, put her face in her hands, and broke. She wept. She wept for her grandmother, for Mateo, for the little girl who had just wanted her father to be proud of her. She cried for the utter, desolate loneliness of her life, a loneliness so profound that even a mafia boss's penthouse felt like a distant, temporary illusion. She did not hear his car pull in. She did not hear his door shut. She only knew he was there when a large, black umbrella suddenly blocked the rain, and his expensive, leather-shod feet were on the step in front of her. She looked up, her face a mess of tears and rain. Vincent stood over her, his own suit jacket darkening with the spray. His face, which had been hard and preoccupied when he left that morning, was now etched with a deep, consuming alarm. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not tell her to get up. He dropped the umbrella, ignoring it as it clattered to the pavement. He knelt in his $1,000 suit on the wet, dirty granite, bringing himself to her level. The rain plastered his dark hair to his head. He said nothing. He simply took her cold, wet hands in his own. He raised her knuckles to his lips and pressed a warm, firm kiss to them. He looked into her eyes, his own gaze black with a rising, controlled fury. "Tell me who hurt you," he said, his voice a low, terrifyingly calm rumble. "I'll end it." The cold, absolute finality of his promise snapped her out of her grief. It terrified her. This was the man who had rescued her from Moretti's men. This was the man who had blood on his shirt. "No," she sobbed, pulling her hands back, grabbing the front of his jacket. "No, please, Vincent, no more violence. Not for this. It's my family. My grandmother. She's in a public clinic. Dying, and they left orders to have me thrown out if I came." She saw his body go rigid, his face hardening into a mask of pure, cold rage. "Please," she begged, shaking him slightly. "They're not worth it. They're already dead to me. Don't become a monster for this. I couldn't bear it. Please, Vincent, promise me, no violence." He stared at her, his jaw working. The internal war was visible on his face, the protector, the killer, and the man she had come to know. He was a king, and she, a crying mess on his doorstep, had just given him an order. Finally, with a long, slow exhale, he nodded. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping the rain and tears from her cheeks. "I promise," he said, his voice rough, "no violence." He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her inside, out of the rain. Later that night, he held her as she finally fell into an exhausted, restless sleep. He listened to her breathing, his own heart a slow, heavy drum of rage. He had promised her, no violence. He kissed her hair, then silently slid out of bed. He went to his study, the city lights his only illumination. He picked up his secure phone and made a single call. "It's me," he said. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional. "The Morales Imports portfolio. Is it vulnerable?" "Very," the voice replied. "Their primary investments are tied to 3 shipping lines, all of which are leveraged against holdings we influence." "Good," Vincent said, his voice flat and cold. "I want them cut off, quietly. Call in the markers, all of them. Start with the Hong Kong and Singapore accounts. I want Ricardo Morales ruined by the time he wakes up tomorrow. I want him to have nothing." "That is aggressive. It will be noticed." "I don't care," Vincent said. "He promised no violence. He didn't promise no consequences." A week passed. The penthouse was calm again, but it was the quiet of a held breath. Sienna's grandmother passed peacefully in her sleep. Sienna grieved, but Vincent's quiet, constant presence was a comfort. He had kept his promise. There had been no dark repercussions, no stories of violence in the news. He had simply held her. She was at the bookstore, organizing a new display. When a woman entered, she was in her 40s, impeccably dressed in a pearl gray suit, her blonde hair pulled into a severe, elegant chignon. She exuded wealth and confidence. "Sienna Morales?" the woman asked, her smile bright and practiced. "Yes, can I help you?" "My name is Catherine Bellows. I'm the director of the New York Foundation for Disadvantaged Women, a new charity. I'll be blunt. I heard your story. What happened with your family at L'Altar? It was inspiring." Sienna blushed. "I don't know about—" "Please," Catherine said. "Your courage to stand up to a family like that. You are exactly the kind of voice we need. We are putting together an advisory board, and we would be honored if you would consider joining us to help young women who have been in your exact position." It was perfect. It was everything Sienna cared about. It was a chance to turn her pain into something useful. I'm flattered," Sienna said. "I don't have much experience." "You have life experience, my dear. That's what matters. Please, just come to a preliminary meeting. A meet and greet. Our temporary office is just downtown. Tomorrow. Say, 3 o'clock? Just a quick chat. Yes, Sienna said, her heart swelling with a new purpose. Yes, I'd like that. She told Vincent that night over dinner. She was excited, animated, her face flushed with enthusiasm. Vincent listened, his expression unreadable. He had gone very still. Catherine Bellows, he said, testing the name. Downtown. Yes, it's perfect, isn't it? It's a chance to actually do something. It is, he said, forcing a small smile. But you will not go alone. Sal will drive you. He will wait outside the door, and he will come in if you are not out in exactly 30 minutes. Understood? Her smile faded. Vincent, it's a charity. It is an unknown, he corrected her, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. My world, Sienna. It is full of unknowns. 30 minutes or he comes in. She sighed, but nodded. Fine. 30 minutes. The next day, Sal drove her to the address. It was a nondescript office building in a busy commercial district. I'll be right here, miss, Sal said, his hand resting near his jacket. I'll be fine, Sal. 30 minutes. She went inside. The office was on the 3rd floor. The door was marked Bellows Foundation. Catherine was there, smiling, just as polished as before. Sienna, so glad you could make it. Come in. Come in. Can I get you some tea? That would be lovely, thank you. The office was small, clearly temporary, with a few desks and some filing cabinets. Catherine bustled about, pouring tea from a thermos. She handed Sienna a cup. So, Catherine said, sitting opposite her, tell me your ideas for the foundation. Sienna, excited, took a long sip of the tea. It was warm, with a strange, bitter aftertaste. She started to talk, to explain her ideas about safe houses, about job training. But the words felt thick in her mouth. The room, suddenly, seemed to be tilting. Catherine's smiling face swam, blurring at the edges. I don't feel, Sienna tried to say, putting a hand to her head. The teacup clattered from her grasp, spilling on the floor. It's all right, dear, Catherine's voice said, sounding very far away. Just relax. 2 men emerged from a back room. They were not the men from the alley, but they had the same cold, dead eyes. Mr. Moretti is so excited to meet you, Catherine said, her smile no longer pleasant but triumphant. Sienna's world went black. She woke to a splitting headache. She was in the same office, but she was no longer on the sofa. She was in a hard-backed chair. Her hands were bound in front of her with thick plastic zip ties. Her feet were bound to the chair legs. She's awake, Catherine said. Sienna's vision cleared. Anthony Moretti sat behind the desk, smoking a thin cigar. He was older than Vincent, with silver hair and a face like a hawk. He looked at her with a chilling, academic interest. Sienna Morales, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. You have caused me a great deal of trouble. Vincent is not a sentimental man, but for you, he has become a fool. What do you want? Sienna slurred, her tongue thick from the drugs. I want Vincent. I want to hurt him, the way he hurt me when he took my operations, the way he hurt me when he killed my men. He smiled. And you, my dear, are how I will do it. He will trade everything to get you back. Sienna's heart hammered. Sal, he would be coming. 30 minutes. She looked at the clock on the wall. 28 minutes had passed. He's coming, she whispered. Yes, dear, we know, Catherine said, patting her shoulder. That's the point. The clock ticked. 29 minutes. Moretti stood up, grinding out his cigar. Get her ready to move. We'll take her out the back. Leave his driver a present. One of the men pulled a gun, checking the clip. The clock hit 30 minutes. The door did not open. It exploded. The solid wood door was kicked off its hinges, flying into the room like a missile, striking the man with the gun and sending him crashing to the floor. Vincent DeLuca stood in the doorway. He was not the man who made her breakfast. He was not the man who held her when she cried. He was a primal force. He was dressed in black, his face a mask of such cold, lethal fury that it sucked the air from the room. Moretti and Catherine froze, shocked by the sheer violence of his entrance. The second man, who'd been moving toward Sienna, lunged at Vincent. Sienna, still groggy, saw it happen in horrifying slow motion. Vincent moved with a speed that was not human. He sidestepped the man's clumsy punch, his hand shooting out, not with a fist, but with rigid fingers, striking the man's throat. The man made a wet, gagging sound and collapsed. Moretti fumbled inside his jacket. "Vincent, stop, or I'll—" Vincent was already moving. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing the desk and flipping it over, sending Moretti sprawling backward. Catherine screamed. "Get out!" Vincent snarled at her, not even looking at her. The woman scrambled to her feet and ran from the room. Moretti was on the floor, his gun skittering away. Vincent stood over him. You're insane," Moretti gasped. "You touched her," Vincent whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was almost biblical. He kicked the gun away. "Vincent, don't!" Sienna cried out, struggling against her bonds. Vincent looked at her, his chest heaving. He looked at Moretti, then back at her. He was at a precipice. He took a step back from Moretti, his entire body vibrating. He turned his back on the man and walked to Sienna. He pulled a knife from his belt and, with 2 quick, precise movements, sliced the zip ties on her hands and feet. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, numb, scrambling to her feet. "Then go. Sal is in the hall." "What? What about him?" she whispered, looking at Moretti, who was crawling toward the door. "Go. Sienna, don't look." His voice was an order. He gently, firmly, turned her toward the doorway and gave her a light push. She stumbled into the hall. Sal was there, his own gun drawn, his face grim. "This way, miss." He hustled her toward the emergency exit. From behind her, from the office, she heard a single, sickening thud, then a heavy, wet sound, then another. It was not a gunshot. It was something worse. Sal didn't flinch. He just pushed her through the stairwell door. "He'll be right behind us." They were in the car, the engine roaring. When Vincent emerged from the building, he was moving calmly, adjusting his cuffs. He got into the passenger seat. "Go," he said. The car sped away. Sienna was in the back, shaking, her entire body numb with shock and the residual drugs. The ride back to the penthouse was silent. They got out in the underground garage. The elevator ride up was a suffocating, sterile silence. The bright fluorescent light of the elevator was merciless. She looked at him. His face was calm, but his knuckles were split and bleeding. And on the cuff of his crisp, white shirt, just above his gold cufflink, was a dark, spreading stain, a spray of arterial blood. It was not his... The sight of it broke her. The reality of what he had done, what she had been shielded from, what she had heard but not seen, crashed over her. She slid down the mirrored wall of the elevator, her breath catching in a raw, ragged sob. "Oh, God!" she wept. "Oh, God, Vincent, it's my fault. I'm so sorry. I'm making you... This monster, it's me. It's my fault." He looked at her, his face ashen. The doors opened to the penthouse. He reached down, pulling her to her feet, and led her inside. That night, she was inconsolable. He had cleaned himself up. His hand was bandaged, the bloody shirt was gone. He pulled her into bed, but she was stiff, her back to him, crying silently in the dark. "I can't," she whispered, her voice broken. "I can't be the reason you do those things, the reason you become something you hate. I can't live with that. I can't be that for you." He was silent behind her for a long time. She felt the heat of his body, the tension in him. Finally, he pulled her back, rolling her over, wrapping his arms around her and anchoring her against his chest. He rested his chin on the top of her head. "Sienna," he said, his voice low and raw, vibrating through her. "I was this man long before I met you." She tried to pull away, but he held her fast. "No, listen to me," he whispered, his grip tightening. "I have done terrible things, things that would make you run from this bed and never look back. I have hated that part of me. For years, I hated it when I took over from my father. I hated it when Mateo died." He paused, his breath shuddering. You don't make me darker. You are the only light. You make me want to be less of that, less of the monster." He held her, his face buried in her hair. "For you," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him. "I would choose a better path, if you ask me to." His words that night, "For you, I would choose a better path," were not an empty promise. They were a vow. The aftermath of her kidnapping and Vincent's brutal rescue was not a return to the fragile domesticity they had known. It was the start of something new, something forged in violence and sealed with a desperate, vulnerable confession. The air in the penthouse was different, the tension was still there, but it was no longer a question of if their worlds would collide. They had collided, and now they had to build something from the wreckage. Vincent began to change. It was slow, seismic. He was in his study more than ever, but the men who visited were not the hard-eyed shadows of his former life. They were men in sharp, $1,000 suits, carrying briefcases full of legal documents. They were his lawyers, his accountants, his new executive board. He was, as Mateo had once dreamed, moving into the light. He was systematically, and at great personal risk, severing ties. He was selling off the businesses that operated in the gray, the nightclubs with backroom games, the shipping routes that forgot to log every container. He was liquidating, diverting, and building a firewall between the DeLuca name and the sins of his father. Sienna watched him, a knot of pride and fear in her chest. She would sit in his study, not in the guest chair, but on the edge of his desk, and watch him work. He would read a clause from a complex divestiture document, look at her, and she would simply nod. She didn't understand the logistics. She didn't need to. She understood the cost. "They won't just let you go, will they?" she asked one night, tracing the new, faint scar on his bandaged knuckles. "No," he said, his voice quiet. He pulled her into his lap, his arms circling her waist. "This isn't a job you quit. It's a crown you abdicate. And there are always men who want the crown. Is it worth it, the risk?" He looked at her, his dark eyes clear and certain. "You are worth it." He was dismantling his empire for her, and she, in turn, supported him with a quiet, fierce loyalty that he had only ever known from Mateo. When he was exhausted, his face gray with the stress of a 10-hour legal battle, she would be the one to unknot his tie, to press a glass of water into his hand, to lead him to bed. She was his anchor. While Vincent was waging his silent, legal war, his other promise, the one of nonviolent revenge, came to fruition. It happened on a bright Wednesday morning. Sienna was reading the paper in the kitchen, and she saw the headline on the front of the business section. "Morales Imports Implodes. Shady Deals, Offshore Accounts Revealed." The article was a brutal, precise takedown. It detailed a complex web of shell companies, illegal loans, and leveraged investments that had all, in the span of 48 hours, been called in. Anonymous sources had tipped off regulators. Key lines of credit had been mysteriously frozen. The Hong Kong and Singapore shipping partners had simultaneously and catastrophically pulled out. Ricardo Morales, a man who had built his reputation on the appearance of old money, was exposed as a fraud. He was ruined, publicly, humiliatingly. Sienna read the article. Her coffee growing cold, she felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, just a cold, quiet emptiness. It was the closing of a door, a final, definitive end to a life that had never really been hers. Vincent had kept his promise. No violence, just the cold, clean execution of a financial blade. 2 days later, Sal buzzed from the lobby. His voice was strained. "Mr. DeLuca, Miss Morales, you have a visitor. It's..." Ricardo Morales. He's making a scene in the lobby." Sienna looked at Vincent. His face was like granite. "Send him up," Vincent said, his voice flat. "Vincent, no," Sienna said, standing up. "I don't want to see him." "He won't leave," Vincent said, walking to the living room. "He is a desperate man, and I want him to see you. I want him to see that you are not his to summon." I will speak to him alone," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Vincent looked at her, searching her face. He saw the fear, but underneath it, he saw the steel. He nodded. "I will be in my study. The door will be open." He raises his voice, "and I will end the conversation." Sienna stood in the center of the vast living room, her hands clasped, her back straight. She was wearing simple black pants and one of Vincent's cashmere sweaters. She looked like she owned the place. The elevator doors opened. Ricardo Morales stumbled out. He was a ghost. The proud, imperious man from the restaurant was gone. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his face a mask of gray, sweaty panic. He looked old and small. "Sienna," he breathed, his voice cracking. He rushed toward her, his hands outstretched. "Sienna, my girl, my daughter." Sienna did not move. She did not flinch. "Father." "You have to help me," he pleaded, grabbing her arms. His grip was weak, desperate. "Sienna, they've taken everything, the banks, the partners. It's all gone. They say I'll be lucky to avoid prison." "I read the papers," she said, her voice cold. "It's a lie, a misunderstanding. It's this man, this criminal you are with. He did this to me, to your family." "He did nothing," Sienna said, her voice quiet. "You did this to yourself." "Sienna, please." He wept, his knees buckling. He was actually sinking, trying to kneel. "You have to tell him to stop. He'll listen to you. I know he will. You're his weakness. Tell him to give it back. Tell him I'll do anything. You can come home. We'll say you were confused. We'll restore your name. We'll restore the family's reputation. Just help me, please." He was begging. Her father, the man who had ordered security to remove her from his birthday dinner, was on his knees, begging her to use her connection to a mafia boss to save him. He was not asking for her. He was asking for her influence. Sienna looked down at him. The last flicker of the little girl who had craved his approval died. She felt the cold, hard certainty of her own worth settle in her bones. She pulled her arms from his grasp. "No." What did you say?" he stammered, looking up in disbelief. "No, you disowned me. You called me a disgrace. You humiliated me. You let Abuela die in a public clinic and forbade me from seeing her. That was your mother." "That was you," she said, her voice steel. "You chose your reputation over your daughter. You chose it over your own mother. And now your reputation is gone. You're right, it is all gone." But you're my daughter. You're a Morales." "No," Sienna said, taking a step back. "I am not. You made that very clear. You lost your daughter 3 years ago. You just didn't realize it until you needed something from her." She looked at him, not with hate, but with a profound, desolate pity. "You have nothing, and you are nothing. Now please leave my home." Ricardo stared at her, his mouth open, the fight drained out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. He had lost. He stumbled to his feet, his face ashen. He looked around the penthouse, at the wealth, at the power. He looked at his daughter, who was no longer his. Without another word, he turned and shuffled back into the elevator, a broken, empty man. The door slid shut. Sienna stood for a long moment, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. She did not cry. Vincent emerged from the study, his hands in his pockets. He did not come to her. He just watched her, his expression one of profound, quiet awe. She finally turned, her eyes meeting his. "You didn't need me to protect you this time," he said, his voice soft. A small, watery smile touched her lips. "No," she whispered. "I guess I didn't." He closed the distance between them, cupping her face, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I'm so proud of you, Sienna." He kissed her, not with passion, but with a deep, reverent respect. Their bond, already strong, became something else. It became a partnership. The tension in the penthouse eased. The war outside was still raging. Vincent was still fighting to untangle his life, but inside, there was a tentative, fragile peace. One evening, as the city sweltered in the late summer heat, he came home early. She was in the kitchen, reading. "Pack a bag," he said, loosening his tie. "What? Why? Is something wrong?" "No." He smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "Everything is for one weekend. Right, I have a place. In the mountains. It's quiet, no phones, no lawyers, just us." The place was a 4-hour drive upstate, in a black SUV that Vincent drove himself. Sal and the rest of his security conspicuously absent. The cabin was not a cabin. It was a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar, built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a vast, misty valley. It was isolated, quiet, and breathtaking. The air was cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. There was no one for miles. "It was my mother's," Vincent said, carrying their bags inside. "She used to come here to paint. It's the only place my father's world never touched." The inside was warm, with a huge stone fireplace, comfortable, worn leather sofas, and shelves filled with books and art supplies. It was not a sterile penthouse. It was a home. That night, they built a fire. They sat on the floor, on a thick bearskin rug, sharing a bottle of red wine. The city felt 1,000,000 miles away. "This is the first time I've felt still in my entire life," Sienna whispered, leaning her head back against his chest as he sat behind her, his arms wrapped around her. "I know," he murmured into her hair. "Here, I'm not DeLuca, I'm just Vincent." "I like Vincent," she said, turning in his arms to face him. The firelight danced in his eyes. He looked at her, his gaze full of a vulnerability she had never seen. The man who had faced down her father, who had crippled Moretti, who was dismantling an empire. He looked at her with a raw, unguarded need that made her heart ache. "I'm falling in love with you, Sienna," he whispered, his voice rough. I think I have been since that night in the restaurant." Tears welled in her eyes. "I think I am, too." He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of their first night, nor the respectful kiss after her father's visit. This was a kiss of profound, emotional surrender. It was slow and deep and full of a love that was both terrifying and inevitable. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist. Her hands tangled in his hair. He carried her to the bedroom, a simple, beautiful room with a bed facing a wall of glass that overlooked the valley. The moon was high, bathing the room in silver light. He laid her on the bed, and this time, there was no fear, no hesitation. There was only them. He undressed her slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, his hands tracing her skin as if she were made of something precious, something holy. She watched him, her hand on his heart, feeling its steady, heavy beat. Their lovemaking was a silent, emotional conversation. It was forehead touches and whispered promises. It was his hand, brushing her hair back from her face as a tear of pure, unadulterated relief slipped from her eye. He kissed it away, his own eyes suspiciously bright. This was not just passion. It was healing. It was two broken, solitary people, letting go of their pasts in the safety of each other's arms. It was his lips on her scars, and her hands on his. It was the moment she looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a mafia boss, but the man who had saved her. And it was the moment he looked at her and saw not a victim, but the woman who had, in turn, saved him right back. The next morning, they woke tangled in the sheets, the sun just beginning to burn the mist off the mountains. Sienna felt a peace so profound it was almost a physical weight. Vincent was watching her, his head propped on his hand. "Hi," she whispered, her voice sleepy. "Hi," he smiled. He reached for his jacket, which was slung over a nearby chair. He pulled something from the inner pocket. I had this made a few weeks ago," he said, his voice suddenly nervous. He opened his hand. On his palm sat a small, black velvet box. He did not open it. He just held it out. Sienna's breath caught. "I'm not asking," he said quickly, his eyes searching hers. "Not yet. It's not the time. The world is too loud. But I wanted you to see it. I wanted you to know that, for me, this is real. This is my intention." Her hand trembled as she took the box. She opened it. Inside was an engagement ring, but it was not a massive, ostentatious diamond. It was a stunning, antique-style ring, platinum, with a single, flawless sapphire. It was the color of his eyes when he had watched her at the art fundraiser. "It was my mother's," he whispered. "The original stone was a diamond. I had it replaced with something that reminded me of you, your strength, your depth." Tears streamed down her face. "Vincent, it's beautiful." "One day," he said, taking the box and placing it on the nightstand, "when this is over, when you are safe, when I am the man you deserve, I will ask you properly." "You already are," she whispered, and pulled him down for a kiss. They returned to the city 2 days later, their bond annealed, their commitment absolute. The peace of the cabin lingered, a shield against the coming storm. Sienna, filled with a new purpose, found the real Catherine Bellows, whose identity had been stolen by Moretti's people. She began volunteering at the actual foundation for disowned women. It was a small, struggling nonprofit, and Sienna threw herself into it. She had found her calling. But the world, as Vincent had said, was loud. The retaliation, when it came, was not a bomb or a bullet. It was a press release. Anthony Moretti, from his prison hospital bed, his hands permanently mangled, had launched his counterattack, a coordinated, full-scale assault on Vincent's new, legitimate financial empire. He had allies, senators, judges, men his father had put in his pocket decades ago. They launched investigations. They froze his assets, citing his known ties to organized crime. They leaked stories to the press, painting him as a monster, and Sienna as his willing captive. The new, legitimate structures he had been building, the ones meant to be his firewall, were suddenly his prison. Vincent was in his study, the room dark, the skyline glittering. When Sienna found him, he had been on the phone for 6 hours straight. "It's bad," he said, not turning. "I know," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I saw the news." I can't protect you from this, Sienna. Not this. This is my father's war. It's fought with whispers and pens, not guns. He's trying to ruin me, to take everything, so that all I have left is the criminal world I'm trying to leave." He turned to her, his face haggard. "I need you to go. To the cabin. Sal will take you. Stay there. Stay out of this. He can't touch you there. I will. I will handle this, and then I will come for you." Sienna looked at him, at the man who had offered her his future, his mother's ring, the man who was willing to send her away to keep her safe. "No," she said. "Sienna, don't," he said, his voice pleading. "Don't fight me on this. I'm asking you, let me protect you." "And what?" she said, her voice rising. I just hide? I sit in a cabin and wait to hear if the man I love has been destroyed? I am not that girl anymore. Vincent, I am not the girl who gets sent away. I'm doing this for you, so you can have a life, a normal life." "I don't want a normal life," she cried, grabbing his arms. "I want you. I want this, the good, the bad, the fight. I am not your weakness, Vincent. I am your partner, and I am not leaving you." They stared at each other, the tension thick, the old dynamic of protector and protected warring with the new reality of who they had become. "I would rather die by your side," she whispered, her voice shaking with the force of her conviction. Then live protected and apart. Vincent looked at her, at the fire in her eyes, at the woman who had faced down her father and refused to be broken. His own fear, his own exhaustion, seemed to drain away, replaced by her strength. He pulled her to him, his arms crushing her, his face buried in her hair. "You will be the death of me, Sienna Morales." "No," she said, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "I'm the one who's going to help you win." The war was not a war of bullets, but of ink and whispers. Anthony Moretti, though physically broken by Vincent's retribution, was not defeated. From his secure hospital room, a place that was half prison, half fortress, he launched his final, desperate assault. He used the only weapons he had left, the deep, rotten roots of his family's influence. Vincent's new, legitimate empire was suddenly besieged. Federal investigations were opened, his bank accounts, the clean ones, were frozen, flagged for suspicious activity. Anonymous sources, ghosts from his father's past, fed stories to the press. Headlines painted him as a brutal mob boss laundering blood money, a monster hiding behind a veneer of corporate respectability. The very structures he had built to escape his past had become his cage. Sienna stood by him. This was not the frightened, hesitant girl from the penthouse. This was a woman who had found her steel. She had quit the bookstore, not at his request, but at her own. She could not. She had told him, shelf fiction when their life was a war. She became his shadow, his partner. She sat in on the 10-hour legal meetings in his study, her presence a silent challenge to the pinstriped lawyers who had, at first, dismissed her. She read the briefs, her mind. Once trained to spot the nuances of high society, now spotting loopholes in legal code, she was the one who remembered a name, a date, a connection from her past that gave Vincent's team a new angle. She was the one who sat with him at 3 a.m, when the weight of his father's sins seemed ready to crush him, and held his hand, her strength flowing into his. "He's trying to isolate you," she whispered one night, watching him stare at the glittering, uncaring city. "He's making it so the only world you have left is the one you're trying to leave, so you have to be the monster again to survive." "He is succeeding," Vincent said, his voice flat, exhausted. "No, he's not," she said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek to his back. "Because he thinks you're alone. He doesn't know about me." The final betrayal, the one that broke Sienna's heart and sealed her past, came on a Tuesday. Vincent's legal team had been working for days to trace the source of the anonymous, untraceable funds that were paying for Moretti's high-priced defense, a defense that was coordinating the media assault. Sienna brought Vincent a cup of coffee in his study. He was staring at a single sheet of paper, his face carved from ice. "What is it?" she asked, setting the cup down. He did not speak. He just pushed the paper toward her. It was a wire transfer confirmation, a complex routing from an offshore shell company in the Caymans, moving $500,000 to Moretti's legal fund. She did not understand until she saw the name of the shell company's managing director, Ricardo Morales. Sienna's legs gave out. She sank into the leather chair opposite the desk. He's paying for Moretti," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "He's allied with him." "It's a desperate move," Vincent said, his voice cold. "Moretti must have promised him that if they take me down, he can use his political allies to restore the Morales name, to save your father from his own ruin." Sienna stared at the paper. It was not just an alliance. It was a choice. Her father, to save his own reputation, had sided with the man who had orchestrated her brother's death. He had sided with the man who had drugged and kidnapped her. He had chosen a monster, definitively, over his own daughter. She was not heartbroken. The grief had been burned out of her. She was just cold. It was the last shackle. She was finally completely free of the name Morales. "He's a fool," she said, her voice quiet, siding with a man who is already a ghost. Vincent looked at her, surprised by the lack of tears. He saw the fire in her eyes, the hard, glittering strength. He had thought this would break her. He saw, now, that it had just finished the forging. The climax came a week later, the City Health Foundation Gala. It was the single most important social event of the winter, held in the grand ballroom of the city's oldest museum. All of New York's old money, new money and political power would be there. "We have to go," Sienna said. Vincent, who had been planning to ignore it, looked up from his desk. "Go? Sienna, my accounts are frozen. The press is crucifying me. Walking in there is suicide." "It's the only move you have left," she said, her hands on her hips. "Moretti is painting you as a criminal, a monster hiding in the shadows. If you hide, you prove him right. You have to walk in there, on my arm, and show them that you are not scared. You have to show them that you are not a gangster. You are Vincent DeLuca, and I am Sienna Morales. And we are not, and will not be, broken." He stared at her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. It was the first real smile she had seen in weeks. "And what dress?" he asked. "Does one wear to their own execution?" "One," she replied. "That makes them wish they had chosen a different guillotine." The ballroom was a sea of glittering diamonds and black tuxedos. When they entered, a hush fell over the crowd. It was not the curious whisper of the art fundraiser. It was a cold, judgmental silence. The flashbulbs of the press cameras were like a barrage of gunfire. Vincent was magnificent. He was dressed in a flawless tuxedo, his face calm, cold, and utterly unbothered. He looked like a king surveying a room full of peasants. Sienna was at his side, her hand on his arm. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was up and at her throat. The only piece of jewelry she wore was Matteo's silver locket. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a queen. She met the stares of the crowd with a cool, challenging gaze. They were a portrait of unbreakable power. For an hour, they navigated the room. Vincent spoke to no one, but he nodded to those who mattered, a silent acknowledgement that he was still in the game. Sienna, meanwhile, had been recognized by the real Catherine Bellows, who was also at the event. She was deep in conversation with her, discussing a new grant for their nonprofit, when Vincent was pulled aside by his lawyer. "I'll be right back," she whispered to him. "I am never more than 10 feet away," he replied, his eyes scanning the room. She finished her conversation with Catherine and turned to find Vincent, but her path was blocked. "Sienna." She froze. Her father, Ricardo Morales, stood before her. He looked thinner, his eyes feverish in his pale, drawn face. "Father." "We need to talk," he said, his voice a desperate rasp. He grabbed her elbow, pulling her from the main floor into a shadowed alcove beneath a massive staircase. "Let go of me," she said, yanking her arm away. "You have to listen to me," he hissed. "You are destroying us. You and that butcher you are with." "I'm destroying nothing. You did this." "He did this." A new voice, gravelly and cold, joined them. Anthony Moretti stepped out from behind a marble column. Sienna recoiled. He was not in a hospital gown. He was in a tuxedo, but he looked like death. His face was a waxy, skeletal mask. His right hand was gloved and held stiffly at his side, a permanent reminder of Vincent's rescue. He must have used the last of his influence, called in the last of his favors, to be here tonight. "Good evening, my dear," Moretti rasped, his eyes glittering with a desperate, manic energy. "Your lover is a fool. He thought he could fight me with lawyers, but he tapped his temple. "I still have friends, the board of this very museum." "What do you want?" Sienna said, her voice steady, her eyes darting toward the ballroom, searching for Vincent. "It's simple." Ricardo broke in, his voice pleading. "Moretti has a plan. He can fix this. He can save our name. But you have to do your part." "Go to the podium," Moretti commanded, his voice low. Tell them he forced you. Tell them he's a monster, that you were his captive, that he kidnapped you and held you against your will." "You want me to lie." Sienna said. I want you to save your family, her father shrieked, grabbing her again. He will restore our name. All you have to do is tell the truth. That is not the truth, Sienna said, her voice shaking with rage. It's the truth that matters, Moretti snarled, taking a step closer. You denounce him publicly right now, and I will call off the dogs. I will save your father's company. I will clear my own name. You refuse, and I will take you all down. I will destroy him, and you, and this pathetic old man. No, Sienna said. You stupid, stupid girl, Ricardo yelled, raising his hand as if to strike her. You are ruining us. Get your hand off her. The voice was not loud. It was a blade of ice. Vincent stepped out of the shadows. He was not the calm, cold king from the ballroom. This was the man from the office, the man from the alley. His eyes were black, bottomless pits of fury. He looked at Ricardo, at his hand still gripping Sienna's arm, and Ricardo stumbled back as if he had been physically struck. This is a private family matter, Ricardo stammered, unconsciously echoing his words from that first night at L'Altar. No, Vincent said. He stepped forward, putting himself between Sienna and the two men. He adjusted his cuffs, his gaze fixed on Moretti. He looked at Ricardo. She's my family now. Then, his gaze, lethal and final, settled on both of them. You, get out. It was a dismissal, an execution. Ricardo was frozen, a mask of terror, but Moretti was a cornered rat. He was ruined. He was desperate. He had nothing left to lose. If I'm going down, he rasped, his good hand fumbling inside his jacket, I'm taking you with me. He pulled a small, silver pistol. He never had the chance to aim it. A waiter, who had been standing 20 feet away holding a tray of champagne, moved. It was Sal. In one fluid, devastating motion, he slammed the heavy silver tray into Moretti's gloved hand. A sickening crack echoed in the alcove. Moretti screamed, a high, thin sound. The gun clattered to the marble floor. In the same second, two other men, one dressed as museum security, one in a tuxedo, had Moretti from behind, slamming him against the column, his arms pinned. It was over in 2 seconds. The crowd gasped, turning to stare. And then, as if on cue, the grand doors of the museum burst open. Uniformed police officers, led by 2 grim-faced detectives, marched into the ballroom. They did not move toward the alcove. They moved toward the main floor. Anthony Moretti, one detective shouted, his voice booming. You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and violations of the RICO Act. Moretti, held by Vincent's men, looked on in stunned, confused horror. Vincent merely brushed a piece of lint from his sleeve. He looked at the panicking man. My legal team sent the full, unredacted file to the district attorney this afternoon. It included a signed confession from your friend, Julian Vance, who decided he preferred witness protection to a prison cell. It seems all your allies abandoned you when they saw the evidence. They're already making their own deals. The police, finally seeing the scuffle, moved in. We'll take him from here. As they dragged a screaming, defeated Moretti away, the ballroom was left in stunned silence. Ricardo Morales was the only one left. He was a wreck, exposed, ruined, and alone. He looked at Sienna, his eyes hollow. Sienna walked toward him. She did not cry. She did not yell. She just looked at the man who had been her father. You lost a daughter? She said, her voice clear and carrying in the silence. But I found myself... She turned her back on him. She walked to Vincent, who held out his hand. She took it, together. They turned and walked. Not out of the museum, but back into the center of the ballroom, their heads held high. They did not stay in the penthouse that night. Vincent had Sal drive them to a private villa he kept on the coast, a place of stone and glass overlooking the dark, churning ocean. The adrenaline of the night had faded, leaving behind a profound, quiet exhaustion. They stood on the terrace, the cold salt spray on their faces. The war, finally, was over. Sienna turned to him. It's done, she whispered. It's done, man, he confirmed. She looked at this man who had dismantled his past and risked his future, all for her. She had one last fear. "I'm ready, Vincent," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "I'm ready for a life with you, whatever that means. But I have to know, am I your partner? Or am I the last promise you have to keep? I will not be your ward. I will not be a responsibility. I need you to want me. Vincent, not just protect me." Vincent looked at her, the moonlight tracing the strong, beautiful lines of her face. He saw the woman who had faced down her father, who had stood by him in a legal war, who had refused to hide. He reached into his pocket and took her hand. "Sienna," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he no longer bothered to hide. "When I met you, you were Mateo's sister, a promise, a responsibility. I was protecting you." He cupped her face, his gaze intense. "I'm not protecting you anymore. You don't need it. You are the strongest person I have ever known." He let go of her, took a step back, and sank to one knee on the cold stone terrace. He opened his hand. In his palm was the black velvet box. He opened it. The sapphire ring glittered in the moonlight, as deep and mysterious as the ocean before them. "You're not mine because you need me," he said, his voice thick, his eyes locked on hers. "You are mine because I cannot imagine this world without you. You are not my responsibility. You are my center. You are my light. You are my home." He looked up at her, the most powerful man in the city, on his knees, completely and utterly hers. "Sienna Morales," he said, "will you marry me?" Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of pain or grief. They were tears of pure, brilliant joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He stood, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her. A kiss of promises kept, of a future earned, of a love that had been forged in fire. Epilogue. 1 year later. The air was crisp, smelling of apples and wood smoke. The house was not a penthouse, nor a coastal villa. It was a sprawling, beautiful old stone farmhouse in upstate New York, with acres of land, a stable, and a porch that overlooked the rolling hills. Sienna DeLuca, her hair in a simple braid, sat on that porch, a laptop open. She was finalizing the budget for her nonprofit, the Phoenix Initiative, a foundation that had, in 1 year, become one of the state's most successful organizations for helping young women escape toxic and abusive family situations. The front door opened, and Vincent came out. He was not wearing a suit. He wore jeans and a worn flannel shirt, and he looked peaceful. He was running his own empire now, a legitimate, global logistics and construction firm, and he was the primary benefactor of the Mateo Morales Foundation, a charity that funded education for underprivileged youth. He handed her a mug of hot cider. "You're going to change the world from that laptop," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "We already are," she said, smiling, leaning back against him. He wrapped his arms around her, and they stood together, watching the sun set over their hills. Their life was not simple. The shadows of their past were long, but they had faced down their demons, together. They had learned that family was not the blood you were born with, but the one you were willing to bleed for. Sienna turned in his arms, her sapphire ring flashing in the twilight. She looked up at her husband, at his strong, handsome face, and her heart was so full she thought it might burst. She kissed him, a slow, familiar kiss full of a quiet, everyday love. He held her, his anchor, his partner, his wife. They had built this life, not from perfection, but from the broken pieces. They had built it from nothing but trust, pain, and a fierce, unconditional love. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Sienna and Vincent. Where are you listening from? I would love to know. Please drop a comment and share your thoughts on the story. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, please be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an update.